Good evening. Good evening, folks, and welcome to this week's Joko Conversation. I am Brother Youssef, member of the Joko Collective, a professor of composition, creative writing, literature, a scholar of culture, cultural studies. And I am joined by my illustrious partner and comrade, Tasha, who's also a poet, a dancer, or a veteran dancer, and an educator, an activist, and the original convener of the Joko. Hi, Tasha.
Hi, Yusuf, and my attention is divided as I get our little posts together to put on screen, but thank you for all of that. And yeah, those things that he said, and I particularly like that veteran dancer. That's good. Veterano, veterano. So, and always, what a privilege it has been to be involved in dance culture since I was a young woman, and to be introduced to the culture and practices in its iteration in Turtle Island and in its iteration in Los Angeles and California since the mid 70s, right? Just to locate it in space and time. All of that, because it all resolves down to culture, our day-to-day understandings, and what things mean when we look out on the world. And that being said, we always take the time to acknowledge and put ourselves in space and time and lineage, acknowledging that the blessing of our consciousness to take up and align ourselves with liberation work as African descendant people, because there's some ever mysterious constellation of incidents and influences and values that have us to have been people that say, yes, I will dedicate my life and energies and work in every way that I can to uplift the cause of liberation, uplift the causes of justice, the causes of uh, balance, humanity, all of those things. And the consciousness itself is a blessing. And so we acknowledge all the energies in our personal lineage that bring us to that place. We acknowledge all the energies in our Afro descendant lineages, names that will resound through the ages, all known, names that will never be known, that have used their ingenuity and their creativity and their boldness and their courage and their uh, wit and wisdom and all the things to push back against um, the tsunami of capitalism and violence and white supremacy and immiseration, and that we look at coming into its ripening in the last 600 years or so, roughly. Um, and yes, we acknowledge all of the members of our African descendant family that have taken up that battle and pushed back and made this difference. And
Oh, Tasha has dropped out or is having Wi-Fi issues, and as we know, that is the thing that happens. But I fully expect Tasha to be back in a moment, and we will, get to the primary topic for tonight, as we're going to be California centric, um, and looking at the at AB 715, AB 715. That might be mistitled AB 175, but that was just a mistype when creating the title, right? This assembly bill that I believe is I think just came out of the I think an assembly, um, California Assembly, what do you call that, committee, right? I think it's when it's one committee and it's about to go to a Senate committee. But Tasha's back, so you were just about to come to the end of your opening comments. So why don't you go ahead and bring it home?
okay, the final acknowledgement and the highlight acknowledgement that we always give is that of the um, ancestors of the First Nations people on whose land we are living, moving, and having our being, and are doing work toward liberation. Um, for us, of course, the Tongva people, the Chumash people, the names of groups I do not know and cannot represent, but I'm gonna bring with full heart, with a full, with my chest full of the names that I do know. Um, and we are fully clear that we came as cargo, and like to repeat the assertion of a First Nations brother who said when they came, they brought our friends with them.
That's
And
right.
we are certainly that. Um, and yeah, so we
Yes.
absolutely uplift and celebrate um, maintaining the maintenance of sovereignty and culture. And it's really quite amazing in the face of the onslaught, right? What do they
Yeah.
say? Fighting terrorism since 1492.
Since 1492. Yes, in the American, well, in Turtle Island. And what was it that Kuko taught us the back of the alligator. Is that right? Yes. Also, the Alligator Island. It's another indigenous name for the continent. The Thank you, Tasha. So,
Absolutely.
when you froze and then dropped off for a minute, I was just quickly filling time, but also, introducing our primary topic for tonight, and that we're going to be quite California centric, although it certainly has implications for the rest of the country, and is in keeping with what's been going on in the country even before the Trump administration, and just extremely intensified under this Trump administration just 6 months in, or whatever it is. The But before we get to the specifics of AB 715 and the threat to academic freedom, um, specifically free speech more broadly, the there continue to be Los Angeles continues to be under military occupation. We saw that, and was this purposeful performance in MacArthur Park a couple of days ago, where this multi-agency event, from my understanding, or some of the reporting I saw, right, agents, as part of this demonstration of military wherewithal in MacArthur Park,
Mm-hmm.
um,
Mm-hmm.
terrorizing kids at summer camp,
Mm-hmm.
basically.
Mm-hmm.
The agents from like the IRS, maybe what is it, alcohol, tobacco, and firearms, also,
Mm-hmm.
just these multiple agencies along with
Mm-hmm.
ICE,
Mm-hmm.
etc.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's underreported the degree to which a lot of these folks, these ICE agents, aren't
Mm-hmm.
actual federal employees, but contractees from these various mercenary outfits, right? These
Mm-hmm.
private armies and that have been created,
Mm-hmm.
and the resistance continues, right? The federal presence in Los Angeles is extremely unpopular.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Unpopular with multiple sectors of the
Yeah.
society,
Yes.
of the region, and it is regional, because it isn't just LA County, right? They were
Right.
in Ventura County today, where there was this some sort of, they raided farms, and there was heavy resistance from the local people,
Mm-hmm.
blocking the roads with cars so military vehicles couldn't get by. And again, this military show of force, agents in full gear, combat gear,
Mm-hmm.
against
Mm-hmm.
local people, right, in sweats and tennis shoes and flip flops, and who were just not having it, though, right? U.S. citizens, and many of whom were, they're trying
Yes.
to strip of citizenship. So that's Ventura County. Um, just reports that the mayor of Paris, in Riverside County, is
Mm-hmm.
advising people to stay home, not go to
Mm-hmm.
work, not let
Mm-hmm.
anyone in the house, know your
Mm-hmm.
rights, etc.
Mm-hmm.
The
Right on.
the bishop, right, the Archbishop of the San Bernardino diocese, don't go to church, right? If you might be vulnerable to being. So again, just again to say, right,
Yes.
the resistance to this intensification of militarized ICE,
Mm-hmm.
aided and abetted by local um, police agencies, despite the sanctuary city status, of many of the municipalities,
Mm-hmm.
people are resisting, right? People
Mm-hmm.
continue to resist, and it's people in the neighborhoods. Right?
Mm-hmm.
But we need to say it probably every day.
Yes.
Los Angeles is experiencing
Yes.
military occupation by the federal government, by the U.S. government, and they are making it unsafe for people in a city that is otherwise experiencing no emergencies other than the pre-existing emergencies like the unhoused, etc.
Absolutely.
You know,
The actual crises.
the
Yes.
actual crises. Yes,
Mm-hmm.
that's some of the that's the. I just wanted to acknowledge uh, some of
Yes.
the most recent news, right, coming out of LA. You mentioned earlier before we went live, an action a couple of days ago in Compton,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Spontaneous action. Action of the people. Yes. Mm-hmm.
right.
And
So
just that. Oh, that's right. One of the things that we wanted to emphasize about that incident was that it was Black people, a neighborhood full of Black people coming out to stand up for, protect, resist on behalf of their uh, Latinx neighbors, you know,
hmm
whoever they are, wherever they are, whatever, you know, whatever status of documentation, what have you, coming
right.
out in solidarity, coming out in understanding, and disrupting this backward notion of it's not my, totally
Yeah.
disproving that Black people are disinterested.
Which has been consistent, right? We know that um, the demonstrations that are ongoing here, in LA, Black people are present and prominent, and all you got to do is look at the footage, right? And again, I just saw a TikTok video earlier today.
Mhm,
Some neighborhood, not what 15 minutes from where I'm sitting right now,
mhm,
um, South LA, South Central LA,
mhm, mhm,
where a group of or one young Black man, actually two, are organizing the neighborhood, right? Letting folks know, um, how they need to move in case ICE shows up, right? And in expressing that both disgust with ICE and solidarity with their neighbors, their friends, the people who work in the neighborhood, etc. Right? What's being disrupted here in Los Angeles. So again, it bears saying that from the west side to the east side, the valley to the north, down to Orange County, San Diego County, some of the most conservative places in California, which has
mhm,
more Republicans than any other state.
mhm,
I self-identify conservatives than any
mhm,
other state in the union,
mhm,
um, but California's got the most people. So
mhm.
the still in those places that have earned reputation for their conservatism, there's resistance to ICE and this particular policy and practice,
Yeah,
which everybody can see is ethnic cleansing. It's nothing but ethnic cleansing. Um,
absolutely, absolutely, and only folk who, um, for various reasons, uh, are willfully ignorant at this
mhm,
point, uh,
mhm,
would say otherwise, even if they don't use the specific language of ethnic cleansing.
mhm.
Um, make that use that particular language. There is the language of this is wrong.
Mhm,
Well, this is wrong. You know,
mhm.
not doing anything to anybody. I
Right.
know this so and so. Um, etc. Etc.
Mhm.
So here it is. So here it is. Sooner than later, we will have our comrade James Simmons on to talk about acceleration and
Yeah.
acceleration and the uh, ideology of accelerationism and the uh, theme with this movement that the administration is the face of, you know, um, to attempt to foment a civil war of some kind of, popular physical
Mm-hmm.
of the people, in the, I guess I should better say, in the civic arena,
Mm-hmm.
you know,
Mm-hmm. A
of
fight they've been itching for
for have
decades.
been, yes, and have been attempting to instigate and
Yeah.
have been, if through nothing else, um through the idiot trying to spread an ideology of the inevitability, right?
Mm-hmm.
Priming the pump,
Mm-hmm.
priming people, trying to convince,
Mm-hmm.
and try to tap and tick and figure out where to apply pressure to their self-identified, white identified, I should say, communities
Mm-hmm.
to step up that belief, and sentiment. And it's still not exact, it's still not quite to the, because it's a what am I trying to say? It's a phantasm, It's a
Mm-hmm.
it's a smoke and mirrors job. It's a, like the old seances, how to do the, those old style, trying to raise these ghosts. It
Mm-hmm.
hasn't been easy, but finally it's, it's taken on, it's gathering some moss, it's
Mm-hmm.
some moss.
As you mentioned, right, it now has the weight of the U.S.
Yeah.
federal government behind it. Right?
Yes, right, to enable it to gather some more moss and
Mm-hmm.
uh, to this great replacement notion, um, old, not new, but the great replacement uh, narrative seems to have been the thing that has really helped it to gather moss, outside
Mm-hmm.
their own uh, their own specific enclave,
Mm-hmm.
So,
Mm-hmm.
it is always good to understand, good to
Mm-hmm.
what you're looking at and what you're dealing with. And the more you got that, um, the more you are in a position to
Mm-hmm.
plan, overcome. Hey, we've done it before. We'll do it
Yeah.
again. We're just gonna
Mm-hmm.
do it again. You know, this is like this, the way people are in the streets and discovering each other in those streets, because even if
Mm-hmm.
we're out for different reasons, it's a space where people have the opportunity to spread some correct information, to exchange you know what I'm saying? And let's see, I'm interested to see what will happen with this kind of organic popular front that's pulling itself together, as it
Yeah.
progresses, because folk
Yes.
aren't letting up. Folk aren't letting up. Ain't nobody gone home.
Yeah, no, and they're not going to
Ain't nobody
again,
gone
right?
home. And particularly
Nobody's
around
going
this
home. Exactly. And no one's intimidated.
Mhm.
Right? And
Mhm.
horrible things are
Mhm.
happening. The thing in Ventura, another thing happened, or as part of the action in Ventura, and then the resistance. As the federal agents, put up their lines, right, that couldn't be crossed and all, and but
Mhm.
along with their use of tear gas and what's the term now, less than lethal.
Less
um,
than lethal. Mhm.
it's been pretty consistent, right? The way members of the press have been um,
Mhm.
attacked, right, and
Mhm.
hit by some of this. And this happened again in Ventura as
Mm.
the Channel 7 crew that was reporting on it. Well, they're positioned with the people who are, were protesting.
Mhm.
But the cameraman was hit twice, with this less than lethal, and was described as bleeding. And they are, they're targeting the press, right? And that too has been part of the overall plan, along
Yes.
with the, really decades long, but certainly greatly intensified in the last 8 years, attack on
Mhm.
the veracity of the press, right? Or
Mhm.
um, the the loyalty of the press, all making the press targets,
Mhm.
um, and that continues to get played out as they press is coming under physical attack, right, from these government agents, whether city or county police or these federal
Mhm.
agents, right, and getting caught in the and I only again not only want to say caught in the crossfire, being targeted also, right? Being
Mhm.
targeted also. So
Mhm.
that happened in Ventura, in the Ventura action. But the people, the people are in the streets. People are not,
Mhm.
Los Angeles, Southern California, broadly, people who who are indigenous to these areas.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
yeah, you mentioned the Chumash, one of the other regional nations, and certainly up in Ventura County, right? You're getting into Chumash land, right? So um,
Mhm.
anyway, that's some of the news and some of the update,
Mhm.
specifically from Los Angeles, as we continue to deal with
Mhm.
military
Mhm.
occupation, while the
Mhm.
Marines continue to guard
Mhm.
a federal building in Westwood where no one is
Mhm.
protesting.
Mhm.
Okay.
Mhm. Mhm.
Anyway,
Mhm.
that's not our main subject for tonight, though.
Not our main subject, but wholly related. Because the last thing that I want to throw
Totally
in
related.
there, the last thing I want to throw in there is, and succinctly, is and I will, what is, how do they say it? I'm self-critical that I don't have
Mhm.
details to offer, verified details, but folks should at least know I'm at least clear that I'm passing accurate information, and something that people aren't generally aware of and should be,
Mhm.
is that in terms of this relationship, um, uh, with state of Israel and the state of the United States and all the other states within that union. The IDF has been training. And this came to
Mhm.
mind when we're talking about the attacks on
Mhm.
media. Attacks
Mhm.
on have been training U.S. police forces and the California Border Patrol, um, uh, customs agents and whatnot in all manner of
Mhm.
all manner of policing areas,
Crowd
air
control,
back, right, and particularly
in
suppression
particular.
of dissent. Yeah,
Exactly.
crowd control, surveillance, all of these things. So this is what it's should be looking like. It should look like
Mhm.
Israel because it is Israel. You know what I'm saying? Which, I mean, indistinguishable from the US. How is this distinguished? You know what I'm saying? Outside of obvious crap, but um in terms of, methods, objectives, etc.
Mhm.
You know,
Yeah.
this,
The
all
system.
part of that relationship. Yeah, something that
Mhm.
we've been talking about since the days of rubber bullets in the Justice for Janitors protests, and you know, and I was
Right.
a kid, not a kitty kid, but a very young woman, at the time that those things were going on. So anyway, um, it's a time of exposure and clarity and getting specific. So speaking of specific, on to our actual topic.
Right. And our actual topic um, is a callback, right, to several weeks ago. Maybe it's been a month now or a month and a half. We were asked a question by, you know, one of our viewers um, in the chat, what we thought about AB 715. I think it was Brother Don Hammond from the Uhuru movement.
Mhm.
And at the time, we didn't have a response because just didn't know enough about it, right? And so, in the meantime, started doing some homework and some research, and so that, yeah. What about AB 715, Assembly Bill, California Assembly Bill 715? Now, in the interim, since that query of us, I had already started doing some homework, right, and to try to understand AB 17, and it came through my work email, an opportunity to sign a petition, right, opposing it, and by then, um, I was clear that I am opposed to it. Want to share some of this article, fairly recent article from the LA Progressive, taking a page out of Trump's playbook. California legislation designed to protect Israeli apartheid and genocide. And that is an article by Marcy Winograd, and it's co-written. And I want to give the other writer's name, Rick Sterling. Rick Sterling. And in addition to reading the article, um, there are several interviews with Marcy Winograd on the topic because she's been paying attention to it for a while. Marcy Winograd, I believe, is local, right? I believe is Southern
Mhm.
California based, a member of Code Pink, a member of Jewish Voices for Peace, an anti-Zionist a Jewish organization. And in the article, the one that is posted right now, you can visit LA Progressive the to find it, but we're going to share parts of it, right, and just respond as she breaks down, right, what's in or she in the article. She and Rick Sterling break down what's in the bill, which as of this week, I believe, was scheduled to move out of an assembly committee. I forget which committee, and should now be going to the Senate Judiciary Committee. If those, yeah,
Mhm.
I think that deadline for the Assembly Committee was yesterday, July 9th. And this article, I forget the exact date, mid June or late June, maybe about 2 weeks ago. Um, we're also going to share with you, though, a an interview from May that Marcy Winograd did, or at least share where you can watch that. When the article, or actually, I should say, when she has a conversation with one of the editors of LA Progressive, Sharon Kyle, um, she's already saying, at the time of that conversation, which one can watch on YouTube on the LA Progressive channel, there were amendments had already been made to the bill, right? Um, and it has received some unfortunate support from coalitions in the or caucuses in the California legislature that should know better, but then we should never be surprised by the machinations of these mainstream duopoly politics, whether people should know better or not. The well, let's let me share the article, and then you and I can talk about it a little.
Yeah, and let me insert
Yeah, go ahead.
before you do, listening to this other session that uh, Marcy Winograd was a part of, that we'll talk about a little bit later, that folks can find on YouTube. One of the things that she um, breaks down, unpacks, is that co-chairs of the Legislative Jewish Caucus, two of the co-chairs of that caucus are also in chair budget committees, chair powerful
Mhm,
budget committees. And so she talks about, the just that kind of quid pro quo
mhm,
politic of, I'll support you because I'm gonna want some try to get some
right.
bills through, and
Mhm,
influence that has for folks
mhm,
thinking this is politics as usual and
right,
not looking at that bigger picture. But
right.
anyway, I just wanted to insert that. That's part of
Yeah,
that.
that's helpful, right? Because that's even the part of the um, or what informs her speculation, which she can only speculate. Why would these various ethnic caucuses, like the Black Legislative Caucus, right, the Latino Legislative Caucus, the Asian American Pacific Islander Caucus, right? Why would they sign on to this? And leading sponsors, leading sponsors, right, have the budget strings, and those constituencies um, need
Mm-hmm.
budget, need funding, particularly for ethnic studies. So it
Yeah.
even does that kind of, it's sort of it's like
Yeah.
putting ethnic studies at the,
Yes.
allowing it to be deployed against another
Yes.
colonized people, right?
Yes.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
even in such a way that, and this is the same group of people
Mm-hmm.
who try to water down ethnic studies
Mm-hmm.
immensely, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that was unable to make it through, right? That the
Mm-hmm.
unpopularity. And as Marcy Winograd points out, this is their follow up, right? That same
Mm-hmm.
group of people, this is their follow up um,
Mm-hmm.
bill.
Mm-hmm.
So so this is how the article starts, right? Pro Israel, California legislatures are taking a page out of Trump's playbook to prevent K through 12 educators from presenting a realistic history and accurate portrayal of contemporary Israel Palestine. And I would add to that or intervene and say that has been the U.S. foreign policy playbook, right? Because that was certainly the Biden response to the solidarity, right, that people have been showing with Palestine over this last what now almost 2 full years.
Hmm.
The their proposed legislation AB715 would be a would-be model for other states, censors educational materials and instruction, punishes educators who deviate from the Israel lobby's version of events, and invites Israel flag wavers to file complaints that burden school superintendents with needless investigations of teachers. That's what so there it is. Now
Mm-hmm.
again, stuff that has been happening in very sort of haphazard ways,
Mm-hmm.
even under the the Biden administration, but to give it the
Mm-hmm.
the power of law, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, so the article goes on to point out though AB 715 purports to be this anti-discrimination,
Mm-hmm.
anti-racism
Mm-hmm.
bill, that
Mm-hmm.
already exists,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right? Despite the
Right.
author's claims that the AB 17 will strengthen protections against discrimination, including anti-Semitism,
Mm-hmm.
right? So, as if it isn't only quote unquote anti-Semitism in K
Mm-hmm.
through 12 education, protections are already embedded in California Education Code to
Mm-hmm.
prohibit discrimination on the basis of nationality, religion, ethnicity, race, gender, and more. Right? So that stuff is already in place. That's already part of Ed Code.
Mm-hmm.
What makes it necessary, including anti-Semitism, right? I mean, it's already embedded in the language. That's
Mm-hmm.
part of the education code that you cannot discriminate. Teachers should not use discriminatory material, openly
Mm-hmm.
racist material, etc.
Mm-hmm.
Um, unless there's a very specific kind of academic um, exercise going on,
Right.
like
Right.
understanding how propaganda works, right? And so let's
Absolutely.
look at these propaganda pieces, right? Um, etc., right? For a critical analysis of it, necessary
Yes.
to understand
Yes.
when you're seeing it, right? in the in the media sphere,
Mm-hmm.
right? Um, and that language, including anti-Semitism,
Mm-hmm.
as if it isn't about weaponizing the idea of anti-Semitism or the tradition of
Yes.
the anti-Semitic traditions of the Christian West,
Yes.
and that anti-Semitism that we know is just beneath the surface of Americanism.
Which is very interesting uh, on a couple of fronts. The front that I'll mention now, and then insert more that I drew from uh, that session with Marcy Winograd is just incidentally, who is the executive that's stepping down from uh, Schwitter
Oh, I don't know. I know, yeah, I don't know by
after the
name, but I remember hearing that.
I
Yeah.
can't call her name, unfortunately, but um just the whole issue being, after this the internal AI mechanism spit up all of this, shall we say, traditional anti-Semitic
Mm-hmm.
rhetoric,
Mm-hmm.
just undeniable. I ain't seen it, I'm just reading about it. I'm
Mm-hmm.
third hand,
Yeah.
right? But I get it. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Vomited up all of this, based on the framework, and because AI feeds you what you feed it, what it
Mm-hmm.
and so anyway, here, here we are, here we are, um, in terms of the way the traditional anti-Semitism sallies forth unchecked.
Right.
Actually, while all of this attention is going to suppressing the critiques of Zionism. But anyway, I just want to
Mm-hmm.
throw that in there.
Mm-hmm. So let's look at because we don't have to go through the whole article, right? But just I highlighted some things. What then is the point, right? As she and Rick Sterling identify some very specific points in the language, part of which you were just getting at, right there with your final comment there. What then is the point? The answer lies in the language of the heavily amended bill. And I'm thinking that maybe that amending happened after the May um,
Mm,
interview. I'm
mm,
not positive
mhm,
about
mhm,
as
mhm,
this article follows that, but then
mhm,
sometimes an article might be around for a month before it can be
mhm,
published. You
mhm,
know, but I thought I've got these highlighted. We can take one at a time, and have some commentary. So yeah, here, let me. Okay, that's what I'm doing wrong. I keep forgetting that I can't make the screen scroll. I have to go back to the other tab.
mhm,
Okay, there we go. What then is the point? The answer lies in the language of the heavily amended bill, which, and this is coming again, this is the language of the bill, defines anti Semitism as criticism of Israel and Zionism. For example, equating Jews or Israelis with Nazis,
mhm,
even if you can make the parallels and have the receipts,
mhm,
quote, denying the right of Israel to exist, unquote,
mhm,
failing to, quote, respect the historical, cultural, or religious significance of Israel to the Jewish people.
mhm,
And that right there,
mhm,
that last part, right, respect the historical, cultural, or religious significance of Israel to the Jewish people, is
mhm,
taken a whole lot for granted.
mhm,
Just I mean, taking a whole lot for granted about the world of the entire world of Jews, right? The,
mhm.
I mean, one can even ask which Jewish people,
Absolutely. Absolutely. Absolutely.
right?
Mhm,
Um, I was listening to a conversation the other day where someone was making the point um, about the mayoral race in New York, and this knee jerk. Um, you have to be supportive of Israel if you want to get the Jewish vote in New York.
mhm,
And somebody's making the point. Do you know how many Jews live in New York?
mhm,
No interest in
mhm.
Israel, right? or,
Exactly. Mhm,
or they would move there, right? I mean,
mhm,
that's just that it is not in their purview. And
mhm,
again, we always, you and I always talk about the underrepresentation, the purposeful underrepresentation of anti-Zionist Jews.
mhm, mhm,
Um, so this, notion of the respect the
mhm,
historical, cultural, or religious significance of Israel to the Jewish people.
mhm,
Maybe the historical, cultural, and religious significance of Jerusalem to the Jewish people,
mhm.
which is not the same thing, right?
Right,
At all.
right. And this, I I will insert again from this other source, um, as she's unpacking the Legislative Jewish Caucus and talking about the leadership of that caucus, one of whom she mentioned, um, and just never mind that the total context, but mentioned um, having participated in a webinar in which he presented the narrative that they're trying to popularize, that Palestine doesn't exist, this
Mm-hmm.
notion that there is no Palestine,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and so you know,
Yeah.
I don't know, you know.
Right,
So
right, right, right,
how does
right.
that work into this notion of denying nationality,
Yeah,
as an anti-group, uh, uh,
yeah,
anti-group,
right.
you know, as hate speech,
I mean,
essentially.
it's incredible, right? 'Cause it's been
Yeah.
Palestine at least since the Roman era, right? It's been called. I mean, it is.
Yeah,
But I've heard that. I mean, I've
this is the
been
bigger story, right?
directly told that, right? There is no Palestine.
Right. Wow.
You can
Yeah.
assert that, right?
Yes. And in certain circles, in the era of information bubbles, and in the era of a more open
Mm-hmm.
fascistic control of information,
Mm-hmm.
you can't make it real, can't make it true, but you can make it believed, you can make it popular,
Mm-hmm.
perceived, you can make it the common understanding.
Right.
And so you will have a nation of
Right.
people with an untrue common understanding in a world of people who have a clear understanding, you know,
Right.
um, that not that, not painting with too broad a brush on uh, who is in alliance with the anti uh, Palestine
Mm-hmm.
sentiment and politic, but there there's a
Mm-hmm.
certainly in the minority,
Mm-hmm.
you know,
Mm-hmm.
certainly in the minority. But anyway, yeah, the again, we can create the specter, we can create the phantasm. And
Mm-hmm.
that's the thing. Please go on.
Well, I was just, looking at, so we know what anti-Semitism is. I mean, actual anti-Semitism, right? And the language of that anti-Semitism, you know, um, these claims around, blood libel, and the very specific, Christian mythologies, and again, primarily of Western Europe, maybe Europe more broadly, but certainly Western Europe and Northern Europe, right? Those calumnies on the Jewish people, those Jewish
Yes.
Europeans.
Yes.
We know, those we know the anti-Semitism, the
Mhm.
the mud people narrative, right?
Yes.
The
Yes.
and the mud people who can hide because they're also white, right? Or but
Yeah.
not really white. All this
And you might
matter.
want to restate that because not everybody knows that.
The mud people. You're talking about the mud people notion.
Yeah, that
And
concept.
yeah, it's a designation of certain brands of militant white supremacist Aryan nations types, right? That the simplest way of putting it is the mud people are all the people who are not white and or Christian.
Mhm.
The
Mm,
mud people,
mhm.
and the mongrels and all
Mhm.
this, this type of language, the
Mhm.
language that would take Jewish people
Mhm.
out of humanity in
Yes.
various ways, right? Or to equate Jewish people with, um, again, the Christian mythology of the satanic and all this.
Yes. Yes, because part of that narrative is this notion of Eve coupling with Satan to produce
Mm-hmm.
the Jewish people,
And all this madness, right? Exactly.
So, okay. Yeah. So,
So
okay.
anyway, the point being, we know anti-Semitism, right? And then the other tropes about who controls the media. Never mind that these are multinational corporations, etc. Right? And all that
Yeah.
stuff, right?
Yeah.
And that is not
Yeah.
recognizing that a nation state is abusing an indigenous population.
Yeah.
And that if anybody doesn't want to be compared to a Nazi, then don't do Nazi things. Don't act like a
Mhm.
fascist. I mean,
Mhm.
simply put.
Mhm.
And are you a democracy or not, right? Because this is
Mhm.
often the claim,
Mhm.
the only democracy in um,
Mm.
the Middle East, as they call it, which I guess, Lebanon, whatever you thought you were,
Mhm.
the West has decided you're not really a democracy.
Mhm.
But a democracy for whom? and it is not equal.
Mm-hmm.
Even the Palestinian citizens of
Mm-hmm.
Israel do not have full rights of citizenship in the same way, right?
Absolutely.
And rights and privileges. And even to the point, like you were saying, this discourse of
Hence
there is no
apartheid.
Palestine.
Yes.
They refuse to call those people Palestinians. They're always called Arabs.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Oh yeah,
Okay.
the Arabs, and they
Okay.
occupy territories.
Okay.
What is now within the boundaries of Israel, they will only use officially, and that is the Zionists, right? They will only use officially the Arabs, right?
Mm-hmm.
The Arab Israelis, the Arabs, not
Mm-hmm.
the Palestinians, as another way of erasing that
Mm-hmm.
nationality, right? Discursively
Mm-hmm.
erasing that nationality. So,
Mm-hmm.
um, and I always think about and this right to exist.
Mm-hmm.
No country has no more right to exist than
Then
it is able to militarily defend.
yeah.
I mean, simply put,
Yeah.
yeah, there are, does the the Republic of New Africa's right to exist will be asserted when the New Africans can militarily defend that land, right?
Mm-hmm.
Biafra didn't get to exist because they lost the war. And we know how invested the West is militarily
Mm-hmm.
in protecting Israel's existence.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's an interesting question. What gives any country the right to exist other than
Mm-hmm.
its ability to defend
Yes.
itself?
Yes. Yes. And in all of this language, from what the League of Nations through the United Nations, through, all
Yeah.
this language about sovereignty, and the respecting
Hmm.
of sovereignty, right? That's like the
Hmm.
the thread that knits all of this conversation about how nations are supposed to move among each other and not move among each other uh, together. So
Hmm.
this,
And
which
can
is
you even have that conversation now in the classroom about the right of any country to exist?
exactly. So and then we know it's going to resolve to. Let me say what I was gonna say.
Hmm.
One of the things that um, Winograd and the folks that she's discussing in these conversations with, um, one of the things that she emphasizes is which is we understand that this is the rule of the day, but in terms of a codification of it, so
Hmm.
a lot of the exceptionalizing of
Hmm.
the the Jewish
Hmm.
experience relative
Hmm.
to the Zionist state
Yeah.
and the part and parcel the exceptionalizing of the Holocaust, um, and all of this. So all of this exceptionalizing of the
Hmm.
states, so an exceptional
Hmm.
sovereignty, an
Hmm.
exceptional that and it's just again it's
Hmm.
just more smoke and mirrors. So folk are just it's a phrase that has meaning. It's just
Hmm.
not a meaning that's connected to any of the actual stated and observed legal uh, statutes, or I'm sure that's the wrong word, but any of the legal, actual international legal language,
Hmm.
um, that this, so if nothing, if there's something that is not an actual thing, is this
Hmm.
notion of the right to exist,
Hmm.
but it's common parlance, that piece that you always bring up, common sense. It's these common sense understandings.
Right.
Um, yes.
Right. Um, so yeah, I mean, yeah, what, and can a teacher bring it up, right? Can a teacher say, hey, let's have a debate
Right.
um, about this, right? Or
Mhm.
hey, I want y'all to do some research on this, and we will
Mhm.
see, etc. Right, as a learning process,
Mhm.
a critical thinking process,
Mhm.
etc. So that's part of the title of this
Mhm.
conversation, right? That what the threat it poses to academic freedom.
Mhm.
So let's read the next little thing here. Requires school districts to advise those who file complaints of available remedies, including seeking restraining orders, presumably against teachers. And I would think also possibly against students, right?
Mhm.
Establish an anti-Semitism coordinator to oversee anti-Semitism teacher training and student
Mhm.
learning beginning in pre-kindergarten, to submit reports on anti-Semitism training to the legislature and
Mhm.
California Department of Education, and direct
Mhm.
complaints against school districts to the state
Mhm.
superintendent of instruction.
Mhm. Mhm.
That's one of the most problematic things, right?
Mhm.
And this, what's so tricky about the
Mhm.
discrimination,
Mhm.
including anti-Semitism,
Mhm.
but this anti-Semitism coordinator centralizes anti-Semitism, right? And just what you were talking, it singles Jewish people out, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, and
Mhm.
also is jumping to the conclusion that teacher training isn't already, and I've actually, it might be an important question to raise, um, adequately anti-racist, right? Or
Mhm.
addressing anti-racism. But how deeply racist,
Mhm.
anti-black,
Mhm.
anti-indigenous,
Yes.
anti-Mexican
Yes.
so much of this is, just
Yes.
already.
Yes.
And I'm gonna say, well, we don't get no court. I mean, or how about just an anti-racism coordinator? I mean, just to
Right.
zero in on the
Right.
anti-Semitism like that.
Right.
Um, Although, again, why the necessity of that is dubious, totally dubious.
Yeah.
Um, and what kind of chilling effect might it
Yes.
have, right? If
Yes.
you got to go into a classroom thinking about whether you're going to get a restraining order if you bring a certain topic up, introduce certain materials, all the way down to pre-K.
Yeah. And I've heard the retort um, to the retort to the criticism of this. Well, they're saying that it's chilling on free speech, or it's an attack on free speech, and da 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 da. But K through 12, this doesn't really apply. K through 12, K through 12, teachers are responsible to present the curriculum. Teachers are responsible to adhere to the curriculum, and da 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 da.
Mm-hmm.
Which is a half truth, which is a partial truth. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, there are
Mm-hmm.
state standards. Yes, there are curriculums, but there's never a time, there's no teacher who is going to tell you, an administrator, has told them that you cannot veer outside of the curriculum. All teachers have uh, some kind of freedom of presentation,
Right.
which was like a lot of resistance to some of the, what was it called? Open court.
Yeah,
Uh,
I
the
remember that.
yeah, teachers were like, you got to follow. And this was something that was more so
Mm-hmm.
elementary, you know, but
Mm-hmm.
teachers in elementary school were like, this is too confining. You want us all to be on the same page at the same time with the thing. And all of this isn't great, and we'd like to
Right.
do some, make some improve anyway. Just that general, so that speaks to an expectation, you know which is a culture of the culture of teaching and instruction,
Mm-hmm.
that there is this kind of freedom to um to move and groove. And again,
Mm-hmm.
that
Mm-hmm.
question of, it brings up all kinds of fundamental questions, but your comment about, well, if, what's wrong with the legislation that's already available about anti-discrimination, what's wrong with that? And none of, if this is an anti uh, uh hate campaign, then how, again, why must it be that this community is exceptionalized in that?
Mhm.
And this, but this question of surveillance that this is so
Mhm.
laden with, and again, this opening the door to the vigilante vibe, right? This is so thick with the drop a dime vibe. This is so thick with, one of the things that she talked about was that you just read about, was the opening the door to anonymous complaint
Mhm.
and legitimizing, all anonymous complaint, right? And yeah, all of the resources that would be needed to police
Mhm.
to police all these classrooms, K through 12, to police
Right.
classrooms for what,
Just in the city of
and
Law, just the
ultimately,
LA Unified
just
School
LA
District.
Unified, it rather than figuring out how to get some damn nurses on these campuses, rather than
Okay.
figuring out how to make sure there's a school psychologist or two
Mhm.
available,
Or 3,
or three.
and reduce these class sizes.
Reduce class sizes, hire teachers, put something
Mhm.
toward increasing salaries for
Mhm.
teachers and teaching assistants and special education assistants who are doing all this work. You know what I'm saying? Do
Yeah.
heavy labor, all of these kinds of, but again, this playbook of instigating a culture war of some
Yeah.
kind. So people are out there with their pitchforks, oh, anti-Semitism, oh, anti-Semitism, and all of this, all of these subtle deceptions, right? So one of the things, this whole piece about um controlling narrative, this whole, this very
Mhm.
sophisticated kind of propaganda exercise, this very sophisticated
Mhm.
propaganda work, where, as she talks about it, it's about adding to, not
Mhm.
replacing existing understandings of anti-Semitism and who
Right.
perpetuates it, but developing and promoting this notion of something called a contemporary anti-Semitism, to expand to these other areas that
Right.
include, right, that are there to absorb new, as she expresses it, new definitions of nationality,
Mhm.
new definitions,
Mhm.
of, certainly, of anti-Semitism, um, these kinds of, um, one of the things that she also talks about in this realm of creating, this new language and this new set of definitions and what have you, is, she says, the bill's actual failure to define, to have a core definition of anti-Semitism, while it's defining all of these nationalities and even talking about contemporary anti-Semitism and whatnot. There's not a core definition of anti-Semitism, um, she says, in the bill, that again leaves this kind of, in a very playbook way, this broad interpretation, because we know all of this will resolve to the discretion, you know what I'm saying, of the surveiller, you know,
Mhm.
that whoever is doing their surveillance,
Mhm.
to define and, all of that. So um, all of these kinds of, so they went back and crafted a, a better approach to um, repression, you know, that can be just used in so many ways. But are, there's more. Is there more? Because I'm
Yeah, well, you were talking about, you mentioned, yeah, as you've been doing, right? Questions of curriculum, right? And a teacher's, ability, right, to fulfill curricular expectations, right, with choices, right, variety, allows for a teacher's creativity, etc.
mm-hmm,
So this last piece highlighted, right, allows the state superintendent, that is superintendent of education, right,
mm-hmm,
to impose fines on county offices of education that fail to remedy violations described in the legislation, provides adoption of instructional materials that, quote, introduce or promote historical narratives, prohibits adoption of instructional materials that introduce or promote historical narratives, such as labeling Israel a settler colonial state. So you can't make an assessment, right, just of a political reality, a political process, a language that is in the writings of the Zionists, the originators, right, who were very explicit about colonizing. I
right,
mean, what do we call those people
right.
in the West Bank?
Yes,
Settlers, right?
yes,
And settlements.
yes,
So,
yes.
but at the same time, I mean, okay, because they don't want to use, they don't like settler colonialism being used to describe the United States or California.
Yeah.
I mean, really, this idea of settler colonialism
Mm-hmm,
is to be made as foreign an idea as
mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
conceptual uh, West.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But again,
Absolutely.
that the prohibition on instructional materials, right?
Yes, yes,
Does this mean a high school instructor
yes,
can't use
yes.
Edward Said in class, or a
Mm-hmm.
particular essay by Edward Said who might use that language?
Right. Right. And also with all of the it's been a long time since I've been in the classroom or even in a learning process about developing curriculum. So I really don't know what has changed, say, in the last 7 years, But this, all of there was such a big push toward introducing academic language,
Mm-hmm.
the academic language campaign, which was specifically, geared toward, yes, critical thinking approaches, yes, uh, uh, i- critical thinking approaches, but moreover, an academic literacy, which meant in part, an introduction to students of the parlance of a collegiate parlance.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Call the thing
Mm-hmm.
what it is and what it will be called.
And
You
what
know
it
what
will be
I'm saying?
called exactly.
In terms of preparing students for higher education, as well as, part of this, the way it fit in with this, preparing the global citizen, you know. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so, it's a direct kind of affront to that policy, which was, at least at the time, again, that I was participating, directly, was a centerpiece. It was
Mm-hmm.
a centerpiece across subject areas, right? how to implement and, raise up awareness of academic language. So, you know, settler colonialism, these are
I mean,
definitely.
if it wasn't, if settler colonialism wasn't accurate, how is it that Israel can be characterized or characterize itself as an outpost of the West? I mean,
Right.
what does
What does
that mean,
what does
right?
that mean? Right.
And yeah, and so we know Hebrew was adopted as a national language, something that was not, that
Yes.
not every Jewish person was happy about, and particularly, Orthodox and religious Jews, that
Mhm.
this was not what this was. But again, many of them are also anti-Zionist, right, on
Right.
religious reasons.
Right.
The But nonetheless, right, even with the adoption of the Afro-Asiatic language of Hebrew, the Israel is full of English language papers, maybe French language papers. I'm guessing, right? I wouldn't be surprised. I
Yeah.
would expect Russian language papers, right,
Right.
to
Certainly.
be
Yeah.
there, but
Yeah.
certainly English language papers. And
Right.
again, this
Right.
its solid position as part of the conceptual West when it is not in the so-called West, um, and treats its non-Western Jewish citizens at best as second-class citizens, but mostly like N's and A's, I guess you might say, just,
Mhm.
you know,
Mhm.
the if it is not a settler colonial state, then, right,
Mhm. Mhm.
along with the other settler colonial states, which,
Mhm.
always often feel like, well, what else can
Mhm.
the United States and
Mhm.
Canada and Australia and New Zealand
How
do?
else can it be described?
But
Right.
they got to have their homies back, because if it can be
Yeah.
unraveled there, where else can it be unraveled, right?
Yeah. And of
Um, you
course we understand. Yes.
yeah, go
Yeah.
ahead.
I was just going to say, and of course, we understand they're trying to repair the fray, the
Hmm.
frayed ends of the narratives that have, the narrative tapestry of white
Hmm.
supremacy and world domination. It's
Hmm.
fraying, like you said thread or ravel, whatever that is, that put a picture in my mind. And, it's
Unravel.
fraying and their unravel is what you said. Yeah.
Hmm.
And they're desperately attempting to, put it on the loom, to
Hmm.
re-ravel, to,
Hmm.
to fix it.
Hmm.
Um,
And you cannot introduce, or how difficult would it be to introduce, you know, uh, material produced by Palestinians, Palestinian Americans, right? Just
mhm,
Palestinians wherever they are in the world,
mhm,
um,
mhm,
who have
mhm,
a different historical narrative, right? Or have,
mhm.
who are going to have another analysis. So
Yeah.
you are actively silencing,
Yes.
as a significant population in the world, and
Yes.
a significant local population in the region, right? The
Yes.
indigenous population,
Yes.
in the region.
Yes. Yes. Um, I have thought, and maybe as we continue on, that we already at 20 minutes after the hour.
Sure
Um,
are.
but then I'll just pose this. That I think it is a good thing to do to develop just a set of, like, talking points, or develop talking question points,
Mm-hmm.
just in terms of taking out your little uh verbal quiver, you
Mm-hmm.
know,
Mm-hmm.
in preparation for day-to-day conversations in this period of heightened crisis and contradiction and heightened
Mm-hmm.
conversation, in terms of finding the provocative questions around this issue. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Um, and one of the reasons is the the we're not going to be having our quote unquote discussions or deliberations, day to day as experts. You know what I'm saying? In one way or another, you know. Um, and most folk are not doing a lot of deep diving with the materials that are available to answer, you know what I mean? So it seems like a good strategy, a good tactic
Hmm.
to find these sets of provocative questions about this, about in other kinds of things to help stimulate um, curiosity, to help stimulate, uh, in questioning and interrogation, and I'm not going to try to formulate anything, on the spot, but just that approach rather than getting into a back and forth, which is so easy to do in the way these uh, discourse dramas are staged, this stage
Hmm.
cultural and discourse wars and competitions that are happening because of the shallowness, and the superficiality of the discourse. So, but
So I want to zero in on these as we're running out of time, or
yeah,
we're time is extending. Um, the other thing about these, the possible lawsuits, as the various remedies, and the fines, right, that are going to further stress already financially stressed school districts. You have here pro-Israel lobby groups such as the Anti-Defamation League, who are all behind this bill, have already filed Civil Rights Act anti-Semitism complaints against the Berkeley Unified School District, a school district in Philadelphia, Cal State Polytechnic. I wonder which, or maybe, well, I wonder which campus, right? Is that Pomona? Is it San Luis Obispo? Etowanda School District in the Inland Empire, Santa Ana Public Schools in Orange County, right? And then share this, or highlight this, because again, just to demonstrate, the where the resistance is coming from. AB 715 would add fuel to ADL fire, encouraging a nationally boycotted organization that backed Trump's abduction of Palestinian activist Mahmoud Khalil, while we might add, they poo-pooed whether or not Elon Musk made 2 Nazi salutes.
right.
To file even more complaints, right? And these complaints, we know they are specifically used to financially strap, these school districts, frighten people, etc. Right? Make it untenable for them to fight back. AB 715 would also exceptionalize Jewish safety over the safety of Muslims, Blacks, Latinos, Indigenous, and others. Quote, does not make Jews safer to have a special process. It separates and divides us from other vulnerable communities, further endangering us, said Liz Jackson, a Jewish parent involved in the Berkeley Parents for Collective Liberation. And that's the attitude, right? Free us all. The
Mm-hmm.
but I want to again point that out because it does, and a lot of the language around both anti-Semitism, Israel, support for Israel, just assumes the widespread and popular support of Jewish people,
Mm-hmm.
religious or not, or
Mm-hmm.
whatever, however they
Mm-hmm.
identify, and that's anti-Semitic, right? Which is a point that Marcy Winograd makes, right? It's anti-Semitic to make that assumption that all Jewish people
Mm-hmm.
just sort of automatically are in support of Israel. Again, that comment about the historical, cultural, legacy, etc. of Israel.
Mm-hmm.
That's assuming a whole lot. That it's in and of itself is anti-Semitic.
Mm-hmm.
Not even allowing, um, not allowing for diversity among Jews in the world, let alone the active opposition that has always been there to
Mm-hmm.
the project of Zionism.
Mm-hmm.
So I did want to highlight this
Yes.
comment from a Jewish parent in Berkeley,
Yes.
and that recognition of, it's just another way of singling Jewish people out, actually, which is likely to be more, to lead to more anti-Semitism than
Mm-hmm.
not.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And
I used,
well stated. Yeah.
yeah, go ahead.
Nothing. Just saying, and well stated.
Yeah,
Stated. Um.
yeah. And so I
Definitely.
thought it'd be, share the image of Seth Morrison, board member of Jewish Voices for Peace
Yes.
Action. And I don't know about Rick Sterling, but the Marcy Winograd mentioned earlier, right, is a member of Jewish Voices for Peace
Yeah.
Action.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
so what is the bill really? It has nothing to do with anti-Semitism, actually, right? It's about anti-Zionism. It is
Yeah.
about quieting anti-Zionism,
Yeah.
and is in keeping with the efforts to silence um, discourse on anti-racism in this country.
Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely. And another modality of that. Again, have we posted yet the interview that I put in the
No,
notes?
let's do that now. Let's
Okay.
do that now, and we don't need to keep sharing the article either. I think we've hit the key points.
Okay.
Um, I'll put it up again real quick, folks. That's the article we were looking at. laprogressive.com/foreign dash policy slash protect Israel,
Hmm.
etc. You can find it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, the video that is worth taking a look at,
Hmm.
the ICUJP channel on YouTube.
Hmm.
And what was that?
Interfaith community uh, for
United.
justice and peace.
Yeah.
United for justice and
Yeah.
peace.
Oh, there it is right on the screen, right?
Yeah.
Interfaith Communities United for Justice and
Justice
Peace.
and peace. Yeah.
And that also is actually, let's see if we can go there real quick and just share a little.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, it's really rich. It's an hour
uh,
long session
uh-huh.
and a deep analysis of which I was only at the beginning. I had
Mm-hmm.
about I
Mm-hmm.
was about 25 minutes in, I would say,
Mm-hmm.
and so they had quite a while to go. But one of the pieces that she also talks about in terms of this manipulation of language, uh,
Mm-hmm.
and this whole, the Orwellian playbook, since you mentioned that
Right.
cover of, civil rights, perverting the aspiration for, civil rights for um, non-white groups,
Mm-hmm.
and using that whole what is it, reverse racism modality. One of the things that she
Right. Yeah,
mentions is
there, yeah, the reverse racism modality.
modality, right? Logic, right? And one of the things that she mentions is uh, the anti-Semitism because of the criticism of the Zionists notoriously and forever have been talked about. Their white supremacy is notorious. There is no question
Right.
about it, right? But
Right.
to zero in on that critique and to try to, erase that critique, um, putting forth this notion that to identify Jews as white is uh, is anti-Semitic in that it uh, does not recognize the diversity of the Jewish, as if as if
Right.
you ever cared about some diversity of
Right.
the Jewish population. You are interested in the empowerment, and I use that term grossly, of European descendant,
Mm-hmm.
that's who you're interested in. You are
Mm-hmm.
white identified,
Mm-hmm.
for all that means.
Exactly.
Anyway, interesting,
Yes, it is
little
interesting. That
manipulation.
is. So I'm going to go ahead and share the video, at least some of it, right? We don't have to look at a lot, so people can get a taste.
Yeah, you might want to scroll, not scroll, but kind of move the timer until you
Uh-huh.
see Marcy Winograd, because the first part is just kind of like highlights of the daily everything. So when you
Yeah.
see Marcy, then they're beginning to have that conversation.
Okay. I think I got it right about here. Yeah, right at the beginning. So I'll back it up just a touch and then go ahead and share. Let's bring the sound back.
We meet some of the bravest, most courageous, compassionate people, and Marcy Winograd is one of them. I'm so proud to have known Marcy for decades, stood with her in her lovely home and garden, and in her run for Congress, in her tireless work now at Code Pink and JVP. One of those people you can always count on to follow the moral path, the path of speaking truth to power. She's doing this right now, has done this seamlessly for decades. And I do hope, Marcy, you work into your remarks today on this very important topic, some of your own personal journey, the challenges you've faced, the tenaciousness you've been able to call upon to share with our group today.
Well, thank you so much for that beautiful introduction, Stephen, and for keeping us in the loop on all of these court cases and how chilling it is that these liberal justices are voting with the extremists on the court, the right-wing extremists. And thank you all for inviting me back and for always showing up and your enduring commitment to social justice. I'm so proud to be among you today and grateful for what many of you and us is a lifetime of work. So with that, I'll jump into the topic, which is to focus on the Israel lobby in California. With Trump's base being so much Christian evangelicals, at least 10 million, we see that influence in a lot of the red states to suppress the voices for equal rights for Palestine and Israel. But in California, it's largely the Legislative Jewish Caucus and a constellation of Zionist organizations, such as the Anti-Defamation League, Jewish Family Services, Jewish JCRC, Jewish Federation, and so forth, that are working in conjunction, I wouldn't say alongside of, but are supporting much of the agenda of the Trump administration in terms of suppressing speech, chilling speech, and conflating anti-Semitism with anti-Zionism. So with that, I thought I would first give some background on the Legislative Jewish Caucus. I know some of you are familiar with this. Feel free to chime in. And I'm going to be calling on Stephen for some legal interpretations. So I'm going to do an overview of the Legislative Jewish Caucus, which is the political wing and its funding arm, and then get into some of the legislation that we're looking at today, and that being AB 715 that targets educators, and SB 472 that would increase funding for contemporary anti-Semitism education. You can imagine what that is. So with that, I'm going to share screen and I'm going to follow Rick's advice here. Yeah, good. Okay, so this is the Legislative Jewish Caucus. It got started, I think, about a decade or maybe more ago. And They, for the most part, introduced legislation to advance Israel in one way or another, to continually remind people of the Holocaust. Certainly, it was a horrible, horrible chapter in world history. It was one of many genocides, and so their focus is to really exceptionalize the Holocaust and to, I would say, weaponize it, exploit the pain and trauma that our ancestors, my ancestors, my extended family experienced in a concentration camp to justify the establishment or the imposition, I should say, of a supremacist state in Palestine, and that being Israel. And if you can review this at your leisure if you want. Under the About section, let's see, you'll see the co-chairs. So Scott Wiener, he represents San Francisco, and Jesse Gabriel represents the San Fernando Valley, Encino, that area. You also have other officers, Dawn Addis, she's from Morro Bay near San Luis Obispo, and Josh Becker from Atherton. And he was recently on just an aside, on a webinar to back a bill called AB 1468, which the Legislative Caucus introduced, but then trashed or abandoned when it met with a lot of opposition from teachers unions. He was on this webinar saying there was never a Palestine. There was no Palestine. There's no Palestine. And after that was posted and shared on social media, the webinar was taken down. But the reason why I want to highlight these two, Scott Wiener and Jesse Gabriel, is because they also, in addition to co-chairing the Legislative Jewish Caucus, Scott Wiener chairs the Budget Committee in the State Senate. And Jesse Gabriel chairs the Budget Committee in the State Assembly. And this is important because lawmakers, as we saw yesterday with unanimous passage of a troubling bill, lawmakers are fearful of their influence and their power over the budget. And other lawmakers who may not agree with their agenda in terms of the promotion and normalization of genocide, they will vote for their bills because they themselves want their bills funded. So they take trips to Israel and invite people on, lawmakers and electeds, sheriffs and so forth on trips to Israel. I also want to show you, bear with me here. Okay, they established this, I think, a couple of years ago. It's the California Jewish PAC to raise money for their work, for electing people who will advance the agenda of the Legislative Jewish Caucus. I call it the Legislative Israel Caucus. It certainly does not represent me. And you can look at some of the contributions. We won't spend a lot of time here, but you can just get a sense of who's contributing. And we have Amazon, $15,000. So the total they've raised in the last couple of years, I mean, it's not a stunning amount. I think, well, it may not be on this page. It's about $460,000, I think. Medical Association, so forth, SEIU. You'll see, if you go through this, you'll see a number of labor unions who are giving, charter schools, Band of Indians, San Miguel Band of Indians, Uber, Dental Association, more pharmaceutical, medical. Anyway, something to explore, see what's going on there. Okay, so recently they introduced a bill, get there, here we go, called AB 715. Here's the bill. Well, this is a summary of the bill that was composed by the Assembly Education Committee that is chaired by Al Moratsuchi from Torrance, who is running for State Superintendent of Instruction. This bill came, as I mentioned earlier, after another bill was abandoned, and that bill was AB 1468. It was opposed by the California Teachers Association, which represents 310,000 teachers across California. So very quickly or soon thereafter, they introduced this bill, AB 715, and what it says is that, as you can see, prohibits a governing board of a school district or county board of education, charter school from allowing the use of any curriculum. So that could be a song, it could be a book, it could be an article, it could be a paragraph that would subject a pupil to unlawful discrimination. Okay. But what they say in the intent of the bill is to ramp up the complaint process to make it easier to lodge anonymous complaints alleging unlawful discrimination. Changes the definition of nationality. So it also includes perceived shared ancestry or ethnic characteristics, residency in a country with a dominant religion, distinct religious identity. Changes the definition of religion for purposes of prohibitions on discrimination in public education, discrimination on the basis of religion. So, Steve, you wrote a little bit about this in your summary of the bill, and maybe you could weigh in on the legal ramifications or the questions this would raise in a larger context about changing definitions of what are considered protected classes under civil rights law.
Yes, I want to weigh in, but I'd love you to continue your description. Okay. Oh, no, particularly the anti-Semitism coordinator.
Sure.
That this bill creates, because I think that leads to some of the most dangerous aspects of this bill.
Yes. Okay, so if you read, most of the bill is listed under the intent of the legislature, and I anticipate that some of what they have listed under intent, they will try to work in as amendments. But the co-authors, Rick Zver, who represents Santa Monica, I think Beverly Hills up through Hollywood, and Don Addis, Morro Bay, San Luis Obispo, together with Jesse Gabriel and Scott Wiener, the co-chairs of the Legislative Jewish Caucus, as well as the chairs of the Black Caucus in the legislature, the AAPI Caucus, and the Latino Caucus. I believe they are working right now, having dialogue on the amendments that they want to write into this bill to take some of the intent into the actual legislation, because the intent is supposed to come in, as you see, subsequent legislation. So in subsequent legislation, they say they want to make sure that they strengthen what's called the Uniform Complaint Procedures, UCP, so that it's easier for people to lodge complaints, not only against teachers, but school board members. They really want to go after school board members. And that was evident in Don Addis's testimony a few weeks ago before the Assembly Education Committee, the one chaired by Maritsuchi, who showed, unfortunately, tremendous bias in how he conducted that hearing in terms of cutting off opposition. 2-1, people opposed the bill, continually cut people off, allowed proponents of the bill, many of them from the constellation of Zionist organizations I mentioned, to talk endlessly. And so they make that easier to file complaints. And LEAs, those are county offices of education. So it's also targeting them. So what do they want to do? They want, at some point, I guess I don't see it here. Let's see. They want,
the coordinator was mentioned in the intent section also.
Yeah. I may have glossed over it, but it includes, under the intent section, the plan to establish an anti-Semitism coordinator to monitor instruction throughout the state. And this is very disturbing for a number of reasons. One of which is that that there is no other coordinator to monitor what instruction or what safeguards are in place to protect students, Black students, African American students, Latino students, anyone else. And so it exceptionalizes so-called Jewish safety, which I would say would be Zionist safety. Interestingly, the bill, this is the bill here, never defines anti-Semitism, though it mentions it 5 times. And I think this is purposeful. I'm going to explain a little bit about the chicanery that's been going on with this bill, but I believe what they want to do is wait until the very last minute. Now, the bill passed the Assembly think it was 68-0 yesterday, 11 not voting. Those are usually people who oppose it, but they don't have the courage to oppose. This bill now goes to the Senate Education Committee, which is chaired by State Senator Perez, who I believe is from Pasadena, South Pasadena area. And from there, if it passes, it will go to the Senate Appropriations Committee. The fiscal analysis from the Assembly Appropriations Committee, chaired by Buffy Wicks of the Berkeley, Richmond, Oakland area, predicted the bill would cost well over $1 million. They really can't predict what it would cost for increased enforcement, increased litigation, more people filing complaints, But the Appropriations Committee and the Assembly also passed it unanimously and without insisting that these authors define their terms. What is anti-Semitism?
Okay, I'll stop it there.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was good, right? A good little sense of what, the deep dive into it, right? So,
yeah.
Again, that, video can be found here to watch in detail. But she covered a lot of the key points. And,
yeah.
And why it's problematic, right? And so, and should be opposed. And it is not an effective way to resist anti-Semitism. It's not even really dealing, I think, with anti-Semitism, right? It is, it is, policing anti-Zionism.
Yes.
And resistance to an ongoing genocide to which the United States and its NATO partners are party and accessories before the fact, right? And through the fact and after the fact.
After the fact.
Who are completely complicit.
Yes.
And so.
Yes.
So yeah. All right. So now we're almost 2 hours in, right? So
yes, I think that was a well spent last 15 some odd minutes. It was a well spent. So folk can know where to get a good deep analysis and take on the bill to understand. Just putting it back in the larger context of how how this is working and how many of the approach to trope creation, tropes are present in this legislation, again, as people are more and more using the term in the language playbook, authoritarian playbook, ultimately, and just increasing that sense of policing, being policed, surveillance, that, all of this language of other and this, that, and the other. And it's also kind of interesting to me that this is a K through 12 at all, that this is
even pre-K in terms of the training that we want to monitor, right?
Right, that it's a pre-K through 12 concern, that there's not a direct attack on the the college students, the kids,
because that's coming from the federal government, right?
It again.
Because that attack is coming from the federal government.
So this is right. So, because, what is a middle schooler going to do with,
right. I mean, that is really interesting, right? But so really, I think, more than anything, high school. But it can also mean, again, something as simple as if for that pre-K child. Can we now share the stories of Palestinian children? There are children books written about Palestine.
Right.
Can those now be shared? And the Palestinian children, Palestinian American children in California schools will now be disappeared from any kind of curriculum. Or at least that's what's being proposed, and we should not underestimate the number of Palestinians that live or Palestinian descent people that live in California.
That's right.
And particularly in the Los Angeles area.
Yeah.
and the San Francisco Bay Area,
Yes.
and the Sacramento area, right?
Yeah. So
Etc.
it just emphasizes for me that that the motive of control, of thought control,
Mhm.
that fundamental kind of motive, and in creating a model, you know, that
Mhm.
can be implemented and can be, adopted and referred to, referenced, and what have you,
Mhm.
solidifying this kind of thing. And then all of this kind of uh, that really important where folk aren't investing the intellectual stamina, maybe is better to say, than aren't having the intellectual stamina, because I think a whole lot of willful ignorance and just selective, um, just being really selective about what is exposed and rebutted, for all of the reasons that Winograd mentioned. But just that need to uncover and to expose these kinds of perversions, again, of the aspiration to inclusivity,
Mhm.
and how, and the challenge, there's a bit of a challenge because of that double, what is it, forked tongue quality, to help folks sort that out, help folks sort that out. Um, and it takes breadth and depth. It takes some history. It takes context. It takes all of the things that they're trying to prohibit discussion of. But
Yeah.
that's their attempt. Let's see how it go. Let's see.
So if you are in California and where it's in committee right now, it should be in committee in the Senate.
Mm-hmm.
In the video, she mentioned the Appropriations Committee. In
Mm-hmm.
the interview with Sharon Kyle of LA Progressive, she mentions the Senate Judiciary Committee, and maybe
Mm-hmm.
that's been its path, right, from whatever committee in the Assembly to the
Mm-hmm.
Appropriations Committee in the Senate, now to the Judiciary Committee. So it
Mm-hmm.
should still be in committee,
Mm-hmm.
as I think one deadline was yesterday, right? So if you're in California, call your elected legislator, your assembly member, and your senator, and tell them to oppose this bill. Contact the governor and tell the governor not to sign it if it should pass. And if you are an Afro-descended person, if you Black, if you are Latinx, whatever country of origin for your ancestors, although I hesitate to say that because in most cases that's the United States. you know
Mm-hmm.
but you
Mm-hmm.
understand what I mean, right?
Yes.
um, and
Mm-hmm.
if you are a member of the Asian American or Pacific Islander, call those folks, call those caucus folks, Black Caucus, Latino Caucus, AAPI Caucus, and let them know they should not have signed on, and that their constituency, want them to oppose this bill. We, again, are perfectly clear on what real anti-Semitism is, and it is not anti-Zionism. And in fact, some of the most anti-Semitic people are the Christian Zionists, who love Israel, right? But
Yeah.
because they see it as hastening the end of the world when all Jews will either convert or be wiped out,
Hmm.
according to their understanding.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So we take anti-Semitism quite seriously because we know it is another
Mm-hmm.
iteration of racism, white supremacy that would dare to assert that some people don't deserve to live, that billions of people don't deserve to live.
Mm-hmm.
So we know what anti-Semitism is, and we know why we oppose it. And we also know that anti-Zionism is not anti-Semitism. And Judaism does not require blind support for the modern state of Israel.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I don't even think the Iron Age kingdom of Israel was 100%, and really you can't call it Jewish because it was the kingdom of Israel, not the kingdom of Judah, right?
Mm-hmm.
So,
Mm-hmm.
but the area's always been diverse, right? And including those historical actual kingdoms, right? The Iron Age kingdom of Israel, and then the much shorter-lived Iron Age kingdom of Judah that becomes a province of the Persian Empire, and the other becomes part of the Assyrian Empire, etc. So anyway, now we almost at 2 hours, so we're gonna say good night. You want to make some final comments, Tasha?
Yes, and they will be succinct. Is just this, like some of these contextualizing comments that you're making. One of the things that we can definitely do, because we have, again, as not everyone is going to have, some kind of academic take or breadth and depth on the subject. So one of the most powerful things that we can do is our homework. Find out, understand this Israel-Palestine history, or this, the history of this dynamic, and all of these pieces that are contextualizing it, because we might be what kind of in alliance with the critique of this bill in general ways, or what have you. But if there's some gaps in your knowledge that you need to fill in, one of the most powerful things that we can do is do our homework, so we can't be tricked, by this trickery, That's it.
That's a great place to end, I think. So folks, thank you for being with us these couple of hours. Yeah, do your own homework. After doing our homework, I personally can't do anything but be opposed to this bill, both as a citizen, a supporter of human rights, broadly speaking, and liberation movements, and as an educator. Right? As an educator, I cannot support this bill. And there have been, probably every semester, right? There are conservatives in class who, it's a space where they can have their say. And, it's not a space for censorship, but for engagement, right? Make your argument. And now listen to this argument, right? And we can all go do our homework and think about it, and etc. And be clear. So anyway, thank you folks for being with us this evening, this Joko. Please do all the things that we need you to do. I haven't checked to see how close we are to 200 subscribers.
200
so, please do subscribe. Do like this and share it. Please share it, and watch it twice. And I mean, it is imperative, right, for you to share it and get the word out, and to get this bill, not passed, right, to put the pressure on our legislature so it doesn't pass, and on the governor, so that if it does pass, it isn't signed, right, that he vetoes it, because this is not protecting anyone from discrimination, the ravages of racism, discursively, or structurally, or interpersonally.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So with that,
Yeah.
we'll say good night. You want to say good night, Tasha?
Good night, Tasha.
Good night. And folks, yeah, good night. As I often like to do, let me leave you with the words of Bob Marley. Revelation reveals the truth. It takes a revolution to make a solution.